Okay, sorry everyone, this is a bit awkward. Going live right now. Going to get David on the line. David, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. This is what we're going to answer to the question, what do you do when you have two international guests who have last-minute schedule changes? And hopefully we got David with us right here in just a moment. And let's see, David, do we have you?
Well, I think so, most of me.
There we go. How are you, David? So sorry for that delay. Can we get you
No problem.
on video, sir?
Okay, I just saw that link, but it said it didn't go anywhere. Just hold on.
We are live right now, so the link, we'll address that in just a moment. Of course, this is our YouTube preview of our upcoming show, Reverse Engineered Crime Scene Investigations with David Hawkins. And today, David, we're talking, of course, about the shooting down, how do we pronounce this guy's name? President
Habyarimana. I don't know. Probably only his wife would be able to pronounce it.
Can you tap the video camera icon on your Skype there?
Hold on. Do that.
So the reason this is important for us to discuss today is that I think that most Americans aren't even aware that Habyarimana was the president of Rwanda who died in a plane crash. And of course, we're going to be talking about the bridge of prey, which is pitch, roll, yaw, pitch, roll, evade, and yaw. And of course, as you've pointed out, David, this is a sequence of maneuvers that have been used to manipulate various types of passenger-carrying vehicles. And the thing that's most interesting to me about this, David, is that, of course, there's a remarkable number of people who have been politically powerful and in one way or another connected to the Clintons who have died in plane crashes. Now, I think thousands and thousands of airplanes are traveling around all over every day, and they've become quite reliable methods of transport for most people. So it's certainly curious when we consider the frequency with which people that know the Clintons or are otherwise politically connected to them are dying in these plane crashes. I'm thinking, of course, about Ron Brown. I'm thinking about this guy. Who else do we know that's died in a plane crash that seems slightly suspicious?
Well, I think a whole bunch of characters. For example, on 911, there were probably 5 senior Raytheon directors, I forget their names, unfortunately, that were associated with the mentor-protege program that was conceived during the Clinton administration, and I believe allowed the Clintons and their cronies to infiltrate major defense contractors with these protege companies that have to be owned by disabled women or people with an ethnic origin other than yours and mine. Over to you.
Well, and of course, this mentor-protege program, it's part of the Small Business Administration, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, and it seems to have been conceived and or accelerated or even weaponized during the reign of Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, who in 1998, she changed her gig from senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. It'd be great going through life with a title like that, wouldn't it, Jason? And then she transfers to Chief Operating Officer of the Small Business Administration, and it appears to be takes control of the mentor-protege program, which obliges major defense contractors, such as Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Martin, to take on board as part of their defense contracts a company that is owned by people deemed to be disadvantaged by virtue of sexual orientation, which is a roundabout way of saying that the American Department of Defense is completely compromised. Over to you.
It's really interesting, particularly in light of the fact that President Donald Trump donated his quarterly presidential salary to the Small Business Administration just a week or two ago. Do we think that is?
Sorry.
Well,
yeah, I mean, and I would suggest that there's a certain level of intimidation, because going back to the the crash of the Habyarimana's plane, these people, that is the Small Business Administration protege companies, inside the pants or the communication systems of the big defense contractors, can place the crash in very precisely. So, for example, this poor gentleman in the plane in Rwanda, the plane, the debris, fell in the gardens of his presidential palace, which adds insult to injury. Over to you.
It's amazing. And you know, I don't know if you can see this, David, but I've included a small image of a guy launching a Soviet shoulder-mounted surface-to-air missile, which is, how would that have been controlled by the Federal Bridge if it's just a guy shooting a rocket?
Well, first of all, some of those missiles are guided. But secondly, what intrigues me is the autopilot that in the Falcon 50,
right,
which conceivably could be hacked, and with the technology like the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, and actually flown through pitch, roll, and yaw maneuvers over the grounds of the presidential palace. So when it was shot down, the debris would fall in the gardens, and then it could be picked up by French military officers, taken away so that the evidence of spot fixing the crash would be removed. Over to you.
And again, to clarify for our audience, spot fixing refers to the death pool betting that you've identified, which has become a favorite pastime of royals and aristocrats and financial and industrial elites by their gambling at White's Gambling Hall. It's well known that this death pool betting has gone on for some time. So what you're suggesting is this French-manufactured Dassault Falcon 50 jet that the president of Rwanda was flying in could have somehow been taken over through similar technology to the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and that French military were there at the ready in the gardens of the presidential palace to pick up the wreckage of the president's plane. So you're suggesting that it was precisely piloted to that location so that his assassination by surface-to-air missile could send a specific message to whoever might choose to intimidate those carrying out this action, that they can get you anywhere they want with such a high degree of precision and control so as to really strike fear into the heart of anyone who might challenge those with the power to do this.
Challenge specifically the Clintons and their cronies. You've nailed it, and actually thank you very much, Jason, because frequently some of my friends tell me, actually a very good friend recently said, I can't listen to your show until you make it clearer what you're talking about. And I think you just helped me enormously, Jason. Over to you.
Well, I find that I have the ability to, it took me a little while, David, but after a couple of our interviews, something clicked in my head and I started to understand your process. I've said to people in the past many times that I recall being in Paris, in Charles de Gaulle Airport many years ago, and I saw this little 4 or 5-year-old French boy rambling in French, speaking to his mother, and I just thought to myself, how can a 4-year-old kid understand French and I can't? But it's got to do with, at a certain point when we're born, we all pop out not understanding any language, and just from listening to it long enough, you begin to understand. And so sometimes when I'm speaking to a person like yourself, whose thought process and whole entire understanding of these events is operating at such an intellectually high level, it's really far beyond what most people are able to, first of all, think about, and second of all, even comprehend. But after listening to it for a while, I've begun to understand the language in which you speak, and I believe one of my skills is the ability to understand complex subjects and explain them to people in a way that's a bit more understandable. I do want to remind everyone, David, that now is the time for them to visit patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and to become a sponsor of David Hawkins, or of course to sponsor Crowdsource the Truth on Patreon by going to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. At 12:30 today, we're going to begin our regular broadcast of reverse engineered crime scene investigations, where David and I go through David's process of identifying specific aspects of a crime scene and linking that signature to a particular technology, in this case, the precise location of this plane crash in the gardens of the presidential palace. Seems mighty coincidental. And when we think about the number of people associated with the Clintons who died in plane crashes, Ron Brown, the president of Rwanda here, there have been many other people. The wife of E. Howard Hunt died in a plane crash after receiving, I think, $1 million payment. This was all tied to Watergate. I think we should, David, do some kind of statistical analysis of how frequently plane crashes occur and how many of these people who have direct links to these powerful political elites have died in plane crashes. We know that a presidential candidate in Brazil 3 or 4 years ago died in a plane crash. It's just becoming too obvious that these plane crashes seem to be manipulated, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. And interesting you talked about the 4-year-old boy chattering away in French because that's all he knew.
Yes.
And how interesting it is to observe that. Because, you know, one of the things we have to do is demystify this process. I mean, anyone from 4 years old to 40 or whatever could read a Sherlock Holmes story. And I think one of the Conan Doyle's first stories was a study in Scarlet, I believe. And at the last chapter in that, Sherlock Holmes was talking to a respectful audience of policemen. And he was saying there are many people in life who, given a series of events, will tell you what comes to pass. There are very few that, given an event, will tell you the circumstances that led up to it. That, in essence, is reverse engineering, Jason.
Yes.
And there's no mystery there. In fact, there's a much bigger mystery and lack of understanding when people reason by association. You know, I see a lot of stuff, well, the Jews done it, the Illuminati did it, the Pope did it, the Queen did it. Well, the Queen isn't, I don't know, 94 plus, and I'm 75 and I have trouble with technologies, you know. This is a high technology attack on the United States of America by enemies, domestic and foreign. And the domestic enemies are put together by people like the Clintons. Bill Clinton is a serial rapist, is the best of my understanding, certainly a traitor. And he's Phi Beta Kappa. Well, if you're looking for an elite group of intellectuals, Phi Beta Kappa was formed, as we know, in 1776, the same year as Kappa Beta Phi, and it has, I believe, 17 presidents, 38 maybe Supreme Court judges, and over 100 Nobel Prize winners.
Wow. David, what's the connection with Rhodes Scholars and Phi Beta Kappa, or is there?
Well, Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. He went to Oxford University to study philosophy, politics, and economics. He was kicked out after 1 year either for rape or dealing in drugs. And you know where he went after that? He went to Moscow.
Wow.
So this clown goes to Moscow, briefs the KGB, presumably, on how to interrogate John Songbird McCain in the Hanoi Hilton, and eventually weasels his way back into the United States, ultimately to become the president of the United States. And in 1997, the scumbag sent General John Shalikashvili to Beijing to speak or address the People's Liberation Army University there. And Shalikashvili says in the transcript of his speech, and some of the stuff gets bleached, I don't know, as soon as we focus on it, that he'd been instructed by his president to leave details of all America's weapons programs. Well, I mean, for me, not being an American, but a Brit that loves America and the best that America produces, which is extraordinary, Shalikashvili and the President of the United States should be lined up against a wall and shot, but, nothing personal.
No, I hear you. Bill Clinton, he's been the source of quite a lot of not good stuff. Now, David, of course, this is our preview show right now. We're going out live on YouTube, on Periscope, on Facebook, on VK.com, on DLive, and the various platforms that we're available on. But I do want to remind everyone that we're going to be diving into this information in just 15 minutes, and that's going to be in our exclusive show that's available only to Patreon sponsors. That's Reverse Engineered Crime Scene Investigations with David Hawkins. So now is the time for people to go to patreon.com/reverse CSI Storyboards. And if you aren't already, become a sponsor of David's Patreon page. Please help us allow this work to continue. It's very important. Both David and I spend a lot of time preparing for these shows, and of course, David's developed this very unique method of researching patents and technologies and tying them to crime scenes. So I would like to encourage people to sponsor David on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, or to become a sponsor of Crowdsource the Truth at patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. And David, what we'll do right now is we'll break from this little preview, we'll reset for our Patreon stream, and then we'll be right back in just 14 minutes only on Patreon.
Thank you very much, Jason.